We are live.
Brilliant. Okay, so we'll welcome everybody and just kick off proceedings. I'd like to open with the Commission's karakia, and then we'll go into some introductions from the Commission side. We'll pass through to you, Mayor Tim, for your introductions, and then into the proceedings. So I'll just open with our karakia. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, kihi aki ana te atakura, ki teo, ki huka, ki heihu, ti hei Māori ora. So it's fantastic to see a team on screen there, and so we'll just go straight into introductions if we can. I'll ask Dr. Sue Bidrose to introduce herself, then we'll go through to Commissioner Bigham, and then I'll do some intros.
Kia ora, I'm Sue Bidrose. I was formerly Chief Executive at Dunedin City Council, been on the Local Government Commission for just a bit over 18 months now. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Tēnā koutou, and please apologies if you can hear anything. There is literally a weed whacker next door to me, so I apologise if it gets a bit rowdy. Kei te mihi atu tēnei uri o Taranaki maunga kia koutou, no ngā ruahine me tia te awa. So I'm Bonita Bigham, I'm from Taranaki, currently a Taranaki Regional Councillor, former South Taranaki District Councillor and Community Board Member, and also have chaired Te Mariwata, which is the National Collective of Māori in the local government space for many years. So grateful to be with you today. Looking forward to a great hearing. Ngā mihi.
Cheers, Bonita. And I'm Brendan Duffy, the Chair of the Commission. Had quite a long time in local government in the Horowhenua District Council as a councillor and mayor, 12 years as mayor, 21 years on council during that time, on national council as well, and the last 8 years on the Commission. Really pleased to be engaged again, having, I think it's fair to observe, we've done some work in Tasman and previous years, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, so it's great to catch up with everybody again. Just make a couple of observations. Clearly, we're online, we're at different parts of the planet. If you spot commissioners with their heads down and we haven't fallen asleep, we'll just be taking notes, which I'm sure you'll understand and appreciate. Tim, Mayor Tim, if you could just carry out your introductions. Oh, probably one other observation is that if there are questions that we need clarity on, we'll offer that through in a right of reply, and that'll give you guys time at your end to go away and get any additional information that might come to pass once we talk to the appellants and listen to what observations are made. So process is pretty simple. You'll summarise your decision so far. We'll listen to the appellants, and then we'll go away and make our decision in due course. So over the next hour or so, we'll see where things land. So passing over to you, Mayor Tim, for your intro of your team, and then into your observations in terms of the decisions that you've made.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Thanks for the introduction, and nice to meet both Commissioners Bigham and Bidrose. Brendan, you have, as you said, had a fair bit to do with us over an extended period of time. So you know our situation reasonably well. So in attendance today, we've got myself and Councillor Christine McKenzie, who is one of the representatives of the Moutere Waimea Ward, and a number of officers. So we've got John Ridd, who's the Group Manager for Service and Strategy, Joe Bywater, who's the Project Manager, who's overseeing the process that we've been through in relation to the representation review, Leith Townsend, who is Council's General Counsel. And also in attendance, we have online Stephen Hill, so from Election NZ, who's been assisting us around process and technicalities, etc., around the legislation and as we've worked through. Stephen's going to just introduce the process we've been through. Then I'll follow that up with a bit of an overview of the key issues as we see them in relation to what we've been through and the appeals that are now being considered. And then obviously it's open up for questions. If you have them, feel free to ask them on the way through. But we won't be taking too long, so there should be plenty of time for questions. And then we look forward to the summing up or right of reply at the end if you have further information or questions you have for us at that point. So you happy for us to kick into it, Brendan?
Please, yep.
So, Stephen, if I could come across to you to just run through the process that we've been through.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, just make sure you can all hear me okay. That's great. And just for the record, it is actually elections.com that I'm a representation review advisor with, not Elections NZ. So just to clarify, we've been working with a number of councils around the country through their representation review process, and have worked quite closely with Tasman on their review. Good process to be part of. What I'll do is just step through the process, really, I guess, take you through the timeline, the key steps that the council's worked through, some of the key issues that have been worked through in that process. And me and Tim will come back in and talk about some of the, I guess, the key points around the decisions that have been made. So we do have a presentation which just steps through those key elements, which we'll have a look at now. It's great. And perhaps flick on a couple of slides ahead. Yeah, I think that's it. That's great. We will, hang on, is there another one following that? Okay. So just flick back to the previous slide. I think that looks like an earlier version. Yeah, thanks. Hold that there. That looks like an earlier version of the presentation. So there may be an updated one that we can supply to you, but I'll step you through the key elements and provide a bit more detail about some of those elements. The process essentially kicked off in September 2023 with the initial workshops, gathering the council together, sort of getting them up to speed with the representation review process, what that was all about, and in particular looking at the key principles that needed to be considered during this process, particularly around fair representation, effective representation, and communities of interest. So there was a good discussion around those key elements from early on that has carried on right through the discussion since then. In September 2023, the council made its resolution to establish a Māori ward, which was then reconfirmed later on in the process under the new legislation. Getting the process more underway in detail, in October of 2023, there was a combined community boards workshop. So that was an opportunity for councillors to discuss with their community boards the process, engage initial thoughts and reactions and ideas from the community boards as to the future structure, including what was working well, what could be changed under the current structure as well. In late October of 2023, there was a workshop just to discuss going out to the community with some initial preliminary engagement, and it was decided to go out to the community with a range of questions really around what understanding people had of the current ward structure, what the community's thoughts were about how well that structure was working for them in terms of representing their needs and their interests. And that was promoted through all of the council's major media channels, both online, digital, and through traditional media like their newsletters, those kinds of aspects. And from late November through to January, that preliminary engagement was underway. It only attracted a very low response rate. I think the number was around 16 responses, so quite a low response rate, which was unfortunate. It did mean that there wasn't any significant trends or statistical elements that could be pulled out from that in terms of providing guidance for moving ahead. But I suppose it's worth noting that there was no particular trend either for or against the current structure from that preliminary engagement. Moving forward then into February of 2024, and there was quite a detailed workshop with the council where they started to discuss the kinds of options that might form part of the discussion with the community going forward. And again, quite a lot of discussion at that point about the communities of interest. So councillors reviewed the latest population data how that population had changed over time since the last representation review. Reviewed what demographic changes and shifts in demography there had been across the district, and in particular, I guess, asking the question, do those boundaries that are in place still reflect the communities of interest that are present across the Tasman district, and were there any changes that would be needed to better accommodate the changes or shifts in population and communities across the district. There was also a review about the number of councillors, so thinking about the effective representation question. The existing number of councillors, 13, was thought to be still an effective number for providing good representation across the district, particularly taking account of aspects like the significant geographic distances that there were between some parts of the district. The fair representation question was obviously a considerable element to be looked at, with a focus on both the Golden Bay and the Moutere Waimea wards, and thinking about those compliance or non-compliance with the plus or minus 10% requirements of the Act. At the previous determination, both Golden Bay and Moutere Waimea fell outside the 10% margin. But that was reviewed by the Commission at that stage, and on the grounds that were put forward by the Council, it was accepted that those non-compliances were acceptable and in fact allowed for fair and effective representation for those communities. And so some discussion centred around whether those circumstances had changed, or did the conditions that applied then still apply in the current situation, and it was the Council's view at that stage that they did. So those previous determinations and comments from the Commission were noted. The councillors did ask staff to go away and model some different options of how the ward structure might be looked at, and so the relevant population data was sourced from Statistics NZ, and along with the council's GIS team, some different options were prepared. So if we go to the next slide, those options were brought to the council in April with a range of models. The first set was based around the existing ward structure, but with two options based on either 13 or 14 councillors. So the 13 was 12 general and 1 Māori, and the 14 was based on retaining 13 general ward councillors plus 1 Māori ward councillor. There was a second set of options which was based on some adjusted boundaries, and I think if you've reviewed the paperwork, you'll see that there was discussion around moving some of the boundaries between some of the wards, and although they made only relatively minor changes, they were considered by councillors, but still didn't meet the compliance requirements that were being looked at. Interestingly, one of the options council has asked us to look at was a quite different structure, adopting 3 general wards instead of the 5 that were in place, and that involved merging some of the existing wards to create quite a different sort of a structure. So that involved things like, let me just check. So under 3A and 3B, there was an option to merge the Golden Bay and Motueka wards, to merge the Lakes Murchison ward with Moutere Waimea, and then retaining the Richmond wards. And all of those maps, hopefully you have in the material that's been provided to you. So quite a different model considered there. Interestingly, one of those models, the 3A, turned out to be fully compliant with the plus or minus 10% requirements, which was certainly of some interest. But again, the council's view, looking at the communities of interest test, was that combining those wards in that way would not meet the communities of interest needs of those communities, particularly, I guess, around any possible merger of Golden Bay and Motueka wards. There were also some options under 4A and 4B in those papers, which were, again, looking at the 3 general ward options, so combining the same types of mergers but with some adjustments to boundaries. But again, I think the council's view in discussing those was that those ward mergers were not going to meet the communities of interest test at that stage. So those were the options that were considered by council through that workshop process. Most of the options, it would be fair to say, council has identified, and Mayor Tim can speak to this in more detail, that there were some issues around both the fair representation and effective representation tests, and in particular thinking about the communities of interest, that sticking with something closer to the existing structure was seen by the council as the optimum option to take forward for the initial proposal and for consultation with the community. So that was effectively option 1B that had been considered during that workshop that was taken forward. There was some discussion about whether an at-large or mixed option might be possible, or a district-wide option, but again, because of the possibility of a loss of rural voice in particular, there was some concern expressed that that wouldn't meet communities of interest tests as well. So next slide. So that came through to council on 17th of July, at which stage the initial proposal was adopted. As we mentioned, largely retaining those existing arrangements with 5 general wards based on the existing boundaries with 13 councillors. So retaining the 5 wards, 13 councillors, and then adding the 1-member Māori ward as per the council's prior decision, and retaining the 2 community boards, the existing boards as they were, given that the feeling from councillors was that they were providing effective representation and that there was no significant groundswell for change to those community board structures. That proposal was open for submissions during July and August of 2024. Total of 93 submissions were received, and again, you'll have in your papers a summary of some of the feedback that was that came in from the community, quite wide-ranging, a number of submissions that were really outside the scope of the representation review, in particular comments about the establishment of the Māori ward, and I know the Commission's looked at a number of councils where that kind of feedback has come through. There were some there were a number of people that supported some elements of the proposal. Equally, there were some people, slightly lesser number, that did not support some elements, and some of those included requests for changes to boundaries, requests for changes to numbers of members, some people wanting fewer councillors. So those were the kind of range of issues that came through and then came back to the council in October 2024. And just noting in the meantime, before that, on the 5th of September, the council in fact, confirmed its previous decision from the previous year to establish a Māori ward. So that was the under the new legislation, the confirmation of the Māori ward. So that enabled the council to move forward with adopting the initial proposal as its final proposal. So 5 general wards with 13 councillors, 1 Māori ward, and 2 community boards, which brought us to, I guess, the appeal process where we are now. So happy to hand back to you, Mayor Tim.
So Stephen, just before you do hand back, can you just help me? There's 2 questions I've got. Can you just very quickly give us an impression of who the attendees were, who worked with you in consulting with the community? First question. The second one is, the community, you've got community committees, a couple of them, I think. I remember, and I just want to understand what level of engagement did you have with the community committee? So there's one, is there one in Motueka, one in Tasman? Community committees?
Stephen, you can probably answer the first bit, and I'll do the community group association bit.
Okay. So just give us a rundown, Stephen. Who fronted up to the community for these discussions?
So there was the early workshop with the community boards. Most of the engagement and consultation that was carried out through the initial proposal process was through the council's own communication channel. So the communication team worked with councillors and myself to prepare the material that went out for consultation that was available online and through hard copy material that was supplied through the council's service centres.
So when you went out to the public, who turned up? Who went?
I'm not sure that there were any in-person events. I think the majority of the consultation was on the initial proposal was carried out either online or through written channels.
Oh, okay.
So just to round that out, so there are slightly more than a couple of associations. So in Moutere Waimea particularly, there are 8 community associations, and those meetings are attended regularly by Christine, who will make some comments in relation to that process, alongside the other Moutere Waimea councillors. And where they overlap, it's not uncommon around Tasman and Motueka Valley to have Motueka ward councillors attend some of those meetings as well. And during the course of this process, at those meetings, there were conversations held, led by councillors, supported by the information that we obviously had out through the various media channels to ensure that we got their feedback. So that is the mechanism that we use for public feedback.
Is it fair to say,
outside
Tim,
of the 2 regions where we have community boards?
So Tim, is it fair to ask the question, is there a record of that sort of engagement? Because I can't see it.
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
Okay.
Because those community associations, unlike community boards, they're not recorded meetings. They are the community's meetings that we attend and provide information. I mean, we could perhaps go and try and find the minutes of the meetings, but I'm not sure that's going to be that helpful because they don't tend to be that fulsome.
I suppose I hope you can just so what I'm trying to get my head around is that what depth of community interaction has occurred that gives grunt to the final decision. I suppose that's really where I'm, from what I'm reading.
I guess, Brendan, we're constantly out in our community. That's our job. As you know, as a former elected member, fundamentally, when we go out with these processes, while trying to engage, and more increasingly, what we find is people don't want to see us face to face. They're busy. They don't like to come out to public meetings. Public meetings tend to be dominated by those with particularly strong views, and that's increasingly a frustration for both us and the attendees. So we tend to find that the best mix is a combination of online, providing the information, providing people the opportunity to feedback in their own time through their own channels, mixed with what has been incredibly successful, in my view, in terms of a much more lower key direct relationship between the ward councillors and their community associations and groups. So, and that includes obviously a more formal process around the Motueka community boards, or the community boards, both in Golden Bay and Motueka, who were engaged and also didn't have objections or to the proposal that we had, and hence we ended up. So I believe it's been a comprehensive process, but I think it's fair to say that given the massive amount of expectations that everyone seems to have on community consultation these days, that most people don't tend to engage in these processes unless they are passionate about the particular issue. And you could read between the lines to suggest there are a few people who are passionate about this, but for the vast majority of people, actually, this is just something that they prefer we carry on and do what we continue to do. I'll just get Christine to fill in because she attended quite a number of those meetings.
Yeah, no, thank you. So as of so in the Moutere Waihi Award, there are actually 8 community associations.
Sorry, just
Now,
hold on for a second. Can somebody get rid of the screen so we can see you, please? There's a slide up. That's better. Fantastic.
yeah,
Right.
okay, it's me
Gotcha.
talking.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the ward there are 8 community associations. Now, the 3 biggest communities, really, Brightwater, Wakefield, and Mapua, I regularly go to their meetings every month. The other ones, sometimes they hold their meetings every 2 months. Some of them I'm not so much as an attendee because we do tend to portfolio it across the 3 Moutere Ward councillors. However, I could say that the meetings that I did attend, I've always fronted the issue around the representation review and talked about it, explained it. My summation of it would be pretty much zero interest by the members of those people who go to those meetings every month. I think there was a bit of interest in terms of what it meant for continuing or not with the Māori ward, but that wasn't part of this. In terms of the boundaries of the ward, really, I could front it and talk about it as much as I like. Any questions? No, sit down. Done and dusted. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Carrying on. So just in terms of, obviously 2 appeals were received in relation particularly to the ward boundaries and particularly around the Moutere Waimea ward and the suggestion that it should be divided up between Motueka and Richmond. There are a number of reasons put forward in those submissions, but in terms of a very high-level summary, and note that you will hear from the individual appellants themselves, but that the Moutere ward doesn't have its own community, i.e. it isn't a community, and that those residents tend to identify more closely with one of the 2 larger communities adjacent to them where they undertake their kind of service, get their services from, go shopping, their kids, should they have them, may attend school, etc., etc. So that is the basis on which we've kind of highlighted these next few slides in terms of the view the council took in response to those concerns and issues that were raised. So in terms of the Moutere Waimea ward, it actually contains quite a number of communities. As Christine's just alluded to, there are 8 community associations across the Moutere Waimea ward, and they are both very diverse and they range from very small to reasonably large in terms of a place like Mapua, Brightwater or Wakefield that are reasonable sized communities with their own kind of central shopping areas. They have cafes, restaurants, pubs, 4 squares, etc., etc. So then you've got your kind of Natamotis, your Tasmans, Redwood Valleys, Dovedales, etc., which are rural areas. They may have an identified central hub, which often is like a community hall where they meet, but they still have, in my view, a very strong sense of identity, which is why they've gone to the effort and sustained over an extended period of time a community group or association, which demonstrates they see themselves as a community. So I think the other thing that's and I just for noting, I represented that ward for a number of years before becoming the mayor. So that was the ward that I was a councillor for. The other thing is that those associations, we meet, so as Christine said, we attend their meetings. The ward councillors regularly, monthly or bi-monthly, depending on their schedule. And then myself and the CEO meet with biannually with the chairs of all of those associations and other ones from places like Murchison, etc., biannually, just for a conversation about what's going on in council, what issues do they have, what can we do better, what can we improve. I'd have to say the representation review was not, and there are a lot of topics on that list, as I'm sure, Brendan, you understand from your background. This is not one of them.
Yeah.
So they were either supportive of the status quo, and while most people, nothing's ever perfect. Yeah, there's always things that if you could wave a magic wand, you might do differently. but it's coming up with a fundamentally better structure that justifies the potential upheaval and changes. So no strong support from the community association. So again, I think in terms of the Mutual Waimea Award, the last thing I'll say is, despite the fact that there is 8 different community associations and a range of sizes, I think they all share one thing, which is they all see themselves as kind of equals. Despite the difference between Mott Valley and Mapua being quite large, they kind of see themselves as equal participants in the process. I don't think that's the case if they're then combined with a Richmond or a Motueka. So rightly or wrongly, that is my perspective from the years I've spent representing that area and the feedback that we received through the process. In terms of the Richmond, of the Golden Bay ward, which is obviously another area which is outside the plus or minus 10%. But again, you'll be well aware, as I'm sure the commissioners are, in terms of the previous determination around the isolated community. We've got some notes in the slides there about the limited access, the distance and time of travel, and its particular character. I won't go through that anymore because I think that's fairly well understood. And then lastly, there's the Richmond ward, which in terms of this representation review also falls outside the plus or minus 10%, albeit by a relatively minor amount. I guess our perspective there is it's a fairly confined urban area. It's actually its ward boundary, ironically, is kind of geographical. It's the river. And to try and address the 0.76 variation would inevitably result in both a geographical and, I guess, a people challenge, because you'd be trying to shoehorn a few people on the other side of the river to try and just kind of meet the numbers, which, again, the council didn't think was, from our perspective, a great outcome for either group. And Richmond has the advantage of being represented by 4 councillors and it doesn't, ironically, doesn't have any form of community group, association, residents group. So they are actually, ironically, the one, although the most populous ward, the one place that doesn't have a community group. And perhaps that is because the council service centre is right in the middle of Richmond. They have good representation. They have good access to their representation. But that's actually been the state for pretty much the whole time I've been in council. So really that's it. That's our summation of where we're at. And obviously happy to ask questions, or if those questions come as part of a follow-up once we've heard from the submitters, then that's fine too.
Sure. I'll just pass through to fellow commissioners just to check in if there's questions. Who's ready?
Yep, I've got a quick question. You talked about where we get exercise. I mean, it sounds like a nice process. You've got great existing links that you've utilised, and that's kind of heartening to hear. But of course, your lack of conforming with the plus or minus 10% is kind of going in the wrong directions. For some cases, you sort of have a look and think, well, that will resolve itself in time. Growth is happening in the right areas and in time, but in some of your cases, the divergence is being exacerbated over time since we were here last, rather than reduced, which is a consideration for us. One of the things, and you've read the submissions. One of the things you said about what you like about the having the Mutere Waimea Award, having 8 organisations, kind of community organisations, who all see them, community association, I think you call them, that all see themselves as equals. I was interested in your Motueka Award, and you do have community associations of some kind there?
No.
Oh, and not in Richmond or in the Motueka ward? No.
So Motueka ward has a community board, obviously,
yes,
a
right.
formal structure alongside Golden Bay.
Great,
and
thank
so
you.
there is a small community association in Maraho, which is a small community kind of just over the hill from Kaitiritiri. So the Maraho Community Association is within the Motueka ward. But largely the council communication representation in Motueka is through the community board process.
So why do you think there's been this real cluster of community associations in that Mutere Waimea ward?
Because they see themselves as communities. I mean, I think that they're self-created. So the fact that they have created a community group or association is precisely because they see them as a distinct community, as opposed to trundling down the road to the Motueka Community Board meeting or trundling over to the Tasman District Council meeting, which aren't, for none of them, it's a very long distance. It's probably at the extreme of the Mutere Waimea ward, it might be 40 minutes, half an hour's drive to either Motueka or Richmond. So they could attend either of those fora, but they have consciously decided and sustained over a long period their own community groups and identity. And I do take your point about the plus or minus 10%. And I wondered whether, I mean, I'm actually,
at some point,
well, no, I'm a pretty, I like facts and figures and science and technicalities and, objective measures. When it comes to this, however, and representation, it is much more of a feel thing. It is what do communities feel is, and whether it's plus or minus 11 or 12, I actually don't think is that relevant to the average voter. They either think they feel well represented, have good access to the council via their community group or association or board, and to their councillors, either directly in person at a meeting or on the phone or online, or they don't. I'm not sure that adjusting the percentages will either improve or not that situation. So I get that from your perspective, you have the joy of a plus or minus 10%
of a legal requirement
criteria.
Yep.
Correct. For us, it's much more about what is the most efficient and effective, and what do the community feel about how they are currently represented and the structures that we use to deliver that.
So I'll take that question on its next step. If the reason in that central ward there is that you've got all of those community organisations because how they really identify is their area and that's where their passion and strength lies, wouldn't that add strength to the Tasman democracy argument that actually if you took some of them and put them up with the Motueka ward, some of them and put them down into the Richmond ward, kept those community organisations for your rural representation, they still stay with their communities of interest, and so the community, because the longer you keep these boundaries in place, like part of the reason we think these boundaries are a community of interest is because the boundaries have been there for a long time, but that's sort of self-perpetuating, and then you keep having the same boundaries and you keep arguing it's still a community of interest. And I'm kind of intrigued as to whether all of those community organisations sort of suggest that the Mutere Waimea ward itself is not a community of interest, it's an agglomeration of community of interests. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm just interested about it. That doesn't mean I've decided to do it.
We could enter into a deep philosophical conversation about what creates a sense of community. There are so many factors to it, and I suggest lots of people have various communities they belong to, their sports group community, their school community, their resident community, their other interested communities. We are not by nature, people are not kind of singular in the communities they belong to. So I guess the council's position is there is so much change, there is so much churn, there is so much stuff that communities have to grapple with every day, that they don't enjoy. Communities just don't enjoy change. It is a big challenge, and we don't see right at the moment that adding another level of change into an already rapidly changing and challenging environment provides significant upside or benefit to justify what I believe will be the downside and the challenge of changing the boundaries and shuffling people around and telling them they're no longer in that community, they're in another community. And I don't think it will necessarily improve if your suggestion was by having some of those people move into those bigger communities, that they're going to bring that sense of community with them from where they were to where they go or where they're now placed. I personally don't think that would help.
No, I didn't make that argument and wasn't at all trying to. What I was suggesting is if what you were saying before is you feel like those community organisations exist because that's their community of interest, then following the Democracy Tasman suggestion, you then end up within your plus or minus 10%, but you've maintained the communities of interest for people who have a community of interest. That's really what I was arguing, or not what I was questioning. Not arguing, I was questioning.
Yeah, not arguing. No, that's good. I understand what you're saying now. Yeah, regardless of where you draw the boundaries, the community still be the community, be the community.
Yeah. And do you have a feel for that? Do you feel, do you have a sense of whether people do actually have that wider Mutere Waimea ward sense of that as a community of interest?
Gosh,
That's
that's
really
hard to tell because again, you're asking me to make massive judgment calls.
Yeah.
I absolutely think the people in community associations do. The people who interact with us regularly do. Do the vast majority of the population, the 57,000 people? No, probably not.
Yeah,
but then I
right.
don't think most of them are interested in it's just a level of administration that they're probably
I have
not
some
interested
sympathy
at
with
all.
that. Absolutely right. Yeah.
feel
Okay,
as
that's
though
good. Thank you.
I feel as though the people that live in those communities, I mean, Tim does and I do, I think you feel much more a sense of Mutere Waimea than you ever would thinking about yourself as being part of Richmond.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably irrelevant, but we want as many people to participate in the process of elections, and actually
that's really relevant.
Potentially alienating people in Wakefield and telling that they're now part of the Richmond ward. I think you risk further alienation of people and not participating, which I think would be a very negative thing.
Yeah, I'd support that because I do think there's a risk that as people see themselves put into that, their influence diminishes. So we're now just part of Richmond. There's whatever it is, 20,000 people there. Yeah. We're just tiny little piece over here. We're not going to have any influence, and therefore we'll just stop bothering. I think that is genuinely a risk.
I think that so that discussion does. It's gone almost a circle because it takes us back to the question I asked earlier about the connectivity to those community committees in some way. And so my sense is that we might cogitate over making some observations around what might be useful to look at in the next review, because we are required to work slightly a bit more than just hearsay, kind of like we need a bit of foundational stuff. I'll leave it at that for the minute. I'll go to you, Benita.
No, I'm good, thank you. My questioning was around the same lines as the concerns around communities of interest voices being diminished. How do you know how it's being tested? So I think it's been covered.
Yeah. Okay. So that's been a useful discussion, and to you, Mayor Tim and Christine, I completely understand those observations that you've made about those genuine pockets of community who have the passion and the values that they think are important to them. So I think we all understand.
That's brilliant.
But we'll look for more detail next time, I think. Now, we are perfectly on time, extraordinarily on time, to now move to our appellants. And Emma, you'll welcome Melanie first.
Yes, she should just be joining in now.
Kia ora, Melanie.
Kia ora, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Now, you've been observing up till now?
I have.
Perfect. Okay. I don't know how practical it is for you to draw that curtain, but you're pretty blurry.
Oh, blurry. Oh, yes, I see. Sorry, that's sunny Tasman.
So look, you've observed the process so far. So we've got your submission, and really keen to hear you summarise your observations, and then there's an opportunity for us to ask some questions. So I'll pass over to you.
Right, thank you. Kia ora koutou. I'm Melanie Ellis I'm from Tasman. I actually work for Tasman District Council, so I know most of the people around the table there. I've also worked at Nelson City Council. I've worked at the Canterbury Regional Council. I'm currently the treasurer at the Motueka Tennis Club, and I'm also the presiding member or chair of Motueka High School. I know you've got a lot of detail from my submission already, so I won't repeat all of it, hopefully. But I don't think the current ward representation meets the needs of my community, and I believe that representation should be and can be improved across the region. I believe that buy-in to the election process is only possible when the voters and residents are connected to the community that they vote in, and I don't think that all the residents in the Moutere-Waimea ward have that privilege. So I'm referring to the people in the Moutere-Waimea ward who are actually community members and part of the Motueka township, which is where we're centred. I'd like to be able to vote in the community that my family and I are most connected to, and that's Motueka. The last election, I had no idea who the electees were in my ward, apart from when I received the election forms. That's because where I live, I don't ever visit Moutere-Waimea ward as per se on that electorate, which is Wakefield, Brightwater townships, because they are on the other side. I have to go through Richmond pretty much to visit those places, so they are well and truly not part of what I consider my community. Whereas the community I am connected to has Motueka at its centre. I know all about the Motueka reps, but can't vote for the policies they supported in the community I live in. The Motueka ward councillors do represent the area I live in, which is Tasman Village, if that's fairer. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one in my community that feels that way. I spoke to some of my peers, and honestly, they didn't know what a representation review was, but they know that they are connected to Motueka town and understand their community and want to be able to contribute and be represented there. The Moutere-Waimea ward interests are not really representative of our community. Specific areas that I'm interested in are the Motueka Pool Project, access to the Motueka Library and the Motueka Sunday Market, for example. The Moutere-Waimea main towns, Wakefield and Brightwater. As I said before, I don't really go to them at all, except as a tourist. And I'm just going to touch on what you were talking about before that you brought up in response to the council presentation. You talked about community associations. I've been to a Tasman Area Community Association meeting. It's literally 5 minutes from my house. They're held every month. There's about 5 people on the committee and who attend, and most of that committee is about planting projects in the Tasman region, which are awesome, but they're not really representative about what the community itself does. It's a group of people who generally work on the weekends and they're retired and they go around and do planting projects. It's a very limited representation, I would say, and definitely not a diverse group that would represent any of Moutere-Waimea ward, even though it's called Tasman Area Community Association. Sorry to say this, but to touch on what Motueka has, they do have one association. It's called the Motueka Valley Association. And again, those are really limited to specific areas and interests of that community, which is on the other side and near a Ngāti Moti region. Councillor Mackenzie also noted that she attends meetings at Brightwater, Mapua and Wakefield, and that's exactly the kind of representation I'm referring to when I talk about the Moutere-Waimea representation and we're not getting it, is because none of those townships are where the rest of us from the Motueka area, even though we're in the Moutere-Waimea ward, we don't attend those places because that's not our community. Wouldn't it be nice if those of us with the community interest got to have a say in who was voted into the board of the council that we represent? I'm a mum of 2 children in Tasman. They've attended their local primary school at Tasman School, and we're in the zone for Motueka High School, which they both attend, travelling there by the school zone bus that they are eligible to go on. My eldest son belongs to the Motueka Gaming Club, and my youngest is a member of both the Motueka Tennis Club and the Motueka Football Club. So we spend a lot of time in Motueka, and we use a variety of the community services and recreation opportunities, as well as obviously attending the local schools and events at Motueka. as I said before, I'm actually the presiding member of the Motueka High School Board, and I can't even vote in the election. I think looking at our community ward from a school zone perspective indicates where the Motueka community reaches and how many people might not be represented in the ward they're represented by, having a say in our community's current and future plans. My community interacts with our community services like schooling clubs, libraries and polders. The children of Tasman, Tasman Bay Christian, Upper Murtry, Dovedale and Ngāti Moti schools are not involved in anything that includes Mapua School, Brightwater School or Wakefield School. However, they all work as a composite together. For example, the primary school swimming sports are held at Upper Murtry and Dovedale schools, and cross country is held at the Mahana Vineyards. Throughout primary school and high school, all the student sports teams at Motueka Bay, including but not limited to touch, rugby, netball, mini ball, basketball, football, etc. And I just wanted to show a map of the Motueka High School zone. Not actually sure if I can share it though, so I might need Emma to share it, yeah, because I'm not linked in with Elaine, who's doing the sharing of the councillors down there. So this is the Motueka High School zone. As you can see, it doesn't reach as far as Tapawera, but it reaches all of Ngāti Moti and out to Upper Murtry, where the bottom of the Upper Murtry T is. I guess that's south of Mapua, and obviously it includes all of Mapua and Tasman, Ruby Bay, Kina, and the Upper Murtry and Lower Murtry townships. So I talked to Mr. Prestige, the Motueka High School principal, because I asked him about how many buses they have running, because obviously we're quite a rural school in many ways, and there's 9 buses that run to all the places, including north of Motueka, which are in the Motueka board zone. And 5 of the buses go south. And looking at this map now, you can see the schools that link into the Motueka High School zone: Ngāti Moti School, Dovedale School, not Tapawera School, that's too far south, Upper Murtry School, Mapua School, Tasman School. All of those are in the zone for Motueka High School. And I believe that all those people who have kids on the buses, I worked out with Mr. Prestige that there's about 5 bus loads from those lower school areas, and that roughly equates to about 300 students. Obviously, that's slightly less families with siblings, etc. But that's how many are heading to Motueka School every day and are part of the Motueka community. I think the rest I've talked about where Tasman sits and where Motueka sits in relation to the other main centres like Brightwater and Wakefield. We're far, far away. So I think it's reasonable to assume actually that a lot of our community is missing out on good representation because we're not in the Motueka ward. And that's about it, I think.
Okay, thanks, Melanie. I'll just get that screen to go off.
Yep.
Thanks, Emma. Just checking in with fellow commissioners. Commissioner Bigham?
Right. Kia ora. Thank you, Melanie, for your comprehensive submission. I'm just interested to know if you might have the numbers. You talk about your specific community not being really recognised or served in the ward that you're currently sitting in. What kind of percentage might that be of the current ward population that you're talking about? So those that you feel are not being recognised or not being able to, yeah, what kind of numbers are we talking about?
I haven't worked out percentage numbers. That's not my area. But as I say, I was looking at families and numbers, because we're only talking a couple of thousand people all up in the Murtry ward that's not part of actual village of Wakefield or actual Brightwater townships. It's all those other people in the middle. And I know that council will have those stats. And I really put that I wasn't. So I think 300 students attending school in Motueka shows a lot of families that are Motueka in the Motueka community, because that's their zone.
Right, thank you very much.
And doing sports there and all the rest of it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bidrose?
Can I just ask Melanie, or maybe this is a question for the council, when the council went out and consulted on the options or talked with various community organisations on the options and what they were thinking, Did you ever feel like this was an option that was up for debate? This idea of sort of effectively splitting that central ward and creating two larger wards rather than two middle-sized wards and a smaller ward. Did you ever feel like that was a subject that your community would have debated and understood, or for those that had an interest?
I think it was to us.
Oh,
I thought it was initially for Melanie.
Oh,
At first,
oh,
did
do
you
I
feel
think,
like
sorry, I thought you were talking to the council.
it may be one for the council as well, but did you feel like for you and your community that was an option that was on the table for you to debate?
No, because I'm not in the Motueka ward, so I can't attend their Motueka interest, and I don't live anywhere near Brightwater or Wakefield, which are the Upper Murtry ward. Mapua possibly, but Mapua is very, very specific about Mapua option choice in their own township and their own wharf and waterfront, and whether or not they're going to build a boat ramp. So, it's they're very specialised. They are associations of very small groups. They're not representing on a whole the community, and we are a very distributed, it's very isolated. And
so
I'm in Tasman Village, so I'm not even as isolated as many of the people.
Yeah. And I think the council's given a run through, but I'm right to assume this wasn't one of the options that was put on the table for consultation. Is that right, council?
they didn't want us. Is that true?
So in terms of the options that were considered, not specifically splitting the Waimea Murtry ward into partly into Mott, partly into Richmond. I would note that last time we did the review, we absolutely did consult specifically on including Tasman and the Motueka Valley area into Motueka, and the response we got from those communities at that time was not supportive of being included. So we considered that again. Do we rerun that conversation? Nice. The decision was, having done that the last time, having got the feedback we got, we decided not to go down that path again.
Cool, thank you. That's useful. That's good information.
Melanie, I just need to get one little point of clarity. You said you cannot attend the Motueka ward meeting, did you say?
Well, of course I could attend, but I'm not part of the Motueka board group. So we don't vote in them. We don't vote for their,
Yeah, I think you used the word you're not allowed.
Rude going in and telling them my opinion. Sorry.
I thought you used the word you're not allowed, and I thought I'd better just check what you meant by it.
But it wouldn't really be fair though, would it? Because it's not they don't represent me. But I'm saying that the councillors do a really great job actually of representing as many people as they can. I'm literally on the other side. I mean, like the border of this is 100 meters or so, it's that close to where I live personally. But the Tasman Village and all of this is not in that zone.
Okay, just going back to council, there's a hand up.
I was just going to clarify the same question, really. There are quite a number of people that attend the Motueka Community Board meeting from a range of communities, because it happens to be a more formal structure, and it considers, I guess, I wouldn't say a wider range of things, but it is a more formal structure. And so certainly, as I said earlier, quite a few people from Moutere will attend the Tasman District Council meetings, appear in a public forum, attend that as their method as well. So there's not an exclusivity to only attending the nearest community association meeting.
Okay, I think we've had some good points of clarity. And Melanie, thanks for the effort that you put into your observations. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thanks.
Correct piece of paper. Now we're moving to the Democracy Tasman presentation. And Emma, we'll let you perform a miracle and make it all happen.
I'll just pull him through now.
Good, Matthias, how are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
I can, and you've been observing us to date, so you've got a pretty good handle on how we've been proceeding.
Yeah, since the beginning of the hearing, yes.
Brilliant, thank you. So we'll just pass over to you for, obviously you've put a very detailed submission in, but we're very keen for you to give us an overall summary, and then maybe we can delve into some questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving me the speaking slot. So my name is Matthias Schäffner, and I'm here today on behalf of the Incorporated Society Tasman Democracy. Tasman Democracy is a membership-based non-profit organization, and we advocate for the interest of the community and encourage debate, dialogue, and democratic decision-making. We filed this appeal because we are not convinced that the proposal from the Tasman District Council for the next local election is fully in line with democratic principles. And our starting point to come to this conclusion was the Local Electoral Act. It defines what the understanding of a fair representation is, namely staying within the 10% rule. And the Local Electoral Act gives clear guidance in what circumstances we can breach this 10% rule, which might happen. But I say it should be the exception. Then turning to the proposal from the council, it would mean that 3 out of 5 wards would break this 10% rule. And in terms of numbers of people, it would mean that 71% of people living in the Tasman district would not get a fair representation after the next local election. And we think such a high number, 71%, quite frankly, is concerning. And adjusting ward boundaries is a reasonable approach to address this and to give more people a fair representation within this 10% margin enacted by Parliament. So our submission to the council, and then as well as the appeal, was based on the information we had from the guidelines published on your website, the discussion paper called Concept of Community of Interest, previous determinations from the Local Government Commission, and also meeting minutes and agendas available on the council's website. So we gave careful consideration to all of these documents that we could find, and we identified that the Muturi-Waimea ward is the main underlying issues why we end up now in this situation where we are. So we suggested to disestablish the Muturi-Waimea ward and to merge the Muturi part into the existing Motueka ward and to merge the Waimea part into the existing Richmond ward. But the council opposed this idea, and they said, quote, disestablishing this ward would divide existing communities of interest. The ward settlement are predominantly rural and coastal in nature and do not naturally share common interest with the more urban centers of Richmond and Motueka. Quote, and we disagree with such a statement, this rural versus urban notion, and we gave detailed reasoning in our written appeal why we disagree. To keep it short, there are 3 larger townships in the Muturi-Waimea ward, Mapua, Wakefield, and Brightwater. And half of the people in this ward live in these 3 bigger urban areas. Also, on the argument urban versus rural, I personally have a strong view that ward boundaries don't necessarily need to align with the urban-rural boundary. It's more important, and I'm quoting again from the discussion paper here, that community consists of person in social interaction within a geographic area and having one or more additional ties, quote end. And I fully agree with this understanding. The focus needs to be social interactions, and they very, very often occur across the urban-rural boundary. So the urban-rural boundary is an oversimplification of the problem, at least here in the Tasman district. It might influence the so-called perceptual dimension a bit, I agree, but it would be in strong conflict with the functional dimension that plays out here in the Tasman district. Of course, all 3 dimensions have to be considered, the political, functional, and the perceptual dimension. But reading the guidelines and the discussion paper and previous determination, it appears to me that more weight needs to be given to the functional dimension. And I can give a few examples what this means for the situation here in the Muturi-Waimea ward. There are no bigger supermarkets in this ward. Bigger supermarkets are in Motueka or in Richmond. So people from the Muteri part, they go shopping in Motueka, and people from the Waimea ward, they go shopping in Richmond. And an interesting point in the discussion paper was how people living outside of a town use the facilities or amenities in a township. And it was explicitly referred to libraries, swimming pools, or in more generally, the role of a council as a provider of services. There are 4 libraries provided by the Tasman District Council: the Richmond Library in the Richmond ward, the Motueka Library in the Motueka ward, the Takaka Library in the Golden Bay ward, and the Murchison Library in the Lakes Murchison ward. The council does not have a library in the Muteri Waimea ward. It seems convenient in terms of distance and also travel time for residents in my area, in the Muteri area, to use the Motueka Library, and for people living in the Waimea area to use the Richmond Library. And the same applies to the service centers of the Tasman District Council. They are also located again in Richmond, Motueka, Takaka, and Murchison. No service center in the Muteri Waimea ward. Then there's a big swimming pool in Richmond operated by the council, and another one is currently in planning stage to be built by the council in Motueka. So again, it seems reasonable to assume that the same pattern applies again and again, as already mentioned for service centers or libraries, that people living in the Muteri part use facilities in Motueka, and people living in the Waimea part use facilities in Richmond. Again, another interesting argument in the discussion paper and also from the previous speaker was about school buses or school zones. And the paper explicitly says, quote, country school bus routes are another and maybe particular useful considering the importance of schooling in community life. To my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody knows, but there is no secondary school in the current Muteri Waimea ward. That means all children in secondary education in this ward need to travel every day across the ward boundary, either into Richmond or to Motueka. And we say, based on that, there are strong indications in the functional dimension that suggest a split of the Muteri Waimea ward. And then ultimately the question is where to split this ward. But fortunately, we already have this double name, Muteri Waimea ward, so it seems easy to do the split. And the council has published details on their own website what they understand as the Muteri area and as the Waimea area. And we fully agree with their geographical description of these areas because they go along geographical features. And specifically, there is a hill ridge, which is called Cut Hill, that divides the Muteri part and the Waimea part. And we find it reasonable to use this geographical feature as the new ward boundary. And in our written appeal, we highlighted this on a map where we think the ward boundary should be. And that perfectly aligns with the map that the previous speaker has shown. And if we do this change in ward boundaries, it not only has the effect to align the communities of interest again, but it would also make the numbers work in terms of the 10% rule. And I don't have the exact numbers of people living in the Muteri part and in the Waimea part, but it appears to me that we can balance this out nicely by adding one more additional council seat to either then the Motueka ward or the Richmond ward, then that both of them stay within the 10% margin. And as a result, this would mean that the majority of people living in the Tasman district would get a fair representation after the next election. And I personally think that is what Parliament intended by enacting the local electoral act with this 10% rule. And lastly, I'd like to comment on one point from the previous speaker that I fully agree. She said that a lot of people don't know what a representation review is. I can fully confirm this. A lot of people I have spoken to, they simply don't know what a representation review is. It's a bit of a technical term. And one I have one reason why I think that is, because as the council highlighted in their opening statement, there were a lot of workshops, 4 or 5 or 6 workshops, but unfortunately, all of them behind closed doors with the public excluded. And this is clearly against the recommendation or what the chief ombudsman expected from council. And we highlighted this to the council numerous times as part of our work in our organization. But until today, it has not changed. And I think it's a contributing factor why people might not so keen to engage, as the council highlighted out at the beginning of their statement. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. Yeah.
Thank you, Matthias. Thanks for those observations, and clearly the passionate interest that you have in the principles of democracy. To be fair, I think we just, in terms of right of reply, get clarity around the last observation you made in terms of workshops behind closed doors. I'll ask for that to be confirmed or clarified, just for purity of process. But it can come back in the right of reply. Where's Commissioner? I'm just losing the screen. Commissioners, any specific questions you'd like to ask? Commissioner Bigham.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you, Matthias, for your very passionate and well articulated defence of the democratic principles by which we should all hope to be electing and representing members of our community. So thank you for that. I'm just interested to know a little bit more about Democracy Tasman. When you say it's a membership-based organisation, how many members do you have, and are any of them, as the first part of my question, are any of them based in the ward that you're proposing should be split?
Yes, we have 20 members in our organization, and I think 17 of them live either in the Motueka ward or the Muturi part of this ward. So the majority of them would like to be in the same ward, right? But there's the border right across us. Yeah. So so this topic concerns most of our members, yes, where they live. Yeah.
Right. So your organisation has become the voice for these members. And I guess what I'm looking for is the evidence or the basis on which you're making these statements, because it's obvious that you know what you're talking about, but who are you representing as the voice when you're talking about these things? I guess that's what I'm looking for.
I cannot represent anyone because I'm not elected representative. I can only speak for our organization. We are 20 people. We are in corporate society, and we have 3 members that run the organization on a daily basis, and I'm one of them. And I can only observe what I'm seeing by going to council meetings, reading their agendas. Last year, I gave 20 speeches in council meetings or community board meetings, and that's what we do, right? We don't engage with hundreds of people. We don't have the resources. We are a non-profit organization with limited resources. Yeah. But our understanding, maybe that's the last point. We come from as you described it, from a really democratic point of view. We look into legislation and regulation and see if they are accurately applied to use cases. That's our focus. It's not so much what I want, or do I want to have a boat ramp in Mapua, yes or no, or this street should be sealed or not. It's our foundation is legislation, regulation, and to see if this is accurately applied. This is our foundation of our organization. Yes.
So like a democratic watchdog, the democracy watchdog kind of thing.
Yes, some people like this word, some people don't like this word, so we try to avoid this, but I think it's a fair description of what we are doing. Yes.
Okay. Can I just follow that up then with, because you've presented a very compelling case for all the reasons you've outlined. How do you think that would land within the community if you were to go out to that community and try and do what the council tried to do? What do you think the response would be?
I think before going out, there needs to be a lot of educational material prepared, what a representation review actually is and what it tries to achieve and what fair and effective representation means. Just going out and telling them, hey, now you're part of a different ward, I would expect there will be a bit of pushback, similar to what probably the mayor said. But my gut feeling is this is based on lack of educational material. So if we prepare this and really carefully inform the people why we have this representation view and what the purpose is and what the benefits in the end can be for all of us, I think this would help a lot. And I'm hoping that a lot of people would accept this change in the ward structure or ward boundaries.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Just checking on Commissioner Bidrose, my apologies.
Were you, Matthias, thank you for your presentation. Well thought out and obviously a lot of work gone in. Were you around in 2019 when the council did suggest something that effectively kind of looked like this? Were you around? Did you submit? Did you take part?
No, I only moved in the area 1 year later in 2020.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hold on. Matthias, I don't have any additional questions that need to be asked, and that doesn't mean to say that what you've submitted hasn't been well received. I think, but I do want to make a couple of observations. Your very passionate desire to see the 10% rule adhered to, I respect that. I think you'll find if you do a bit of exploration across the reviews that we've done to date, there are quite a number of occasions where, for good reason, from the Commission's perspective, that line does get crossed, and that's all about communities of interest. The comment you made about the lack of community interest, I'd like to think your comfort is that this process, where the Local Government Commission has a responsibility to overarchingly observe what councils have done, hopefully gives you comfort that when we do make our decision, it's one that factors in communities and people and environment and how best they might be represented. Last point is that it would be reasonable to observe that to make such a substantive change during this process is probably a step harder than achievable. But in our deliberations, I'm sure we're going to consider what we will be asking the council to look at its next review. I think that's pretty obvious. So I just want to give you those feedback points face to face, and probably won't see you again. But I just would like you to get that little bit of a perspective on where we're going. So thank you very, very much for the observations and the effort and energy, and I wish you well.
Yeah, thank you.
So in terms of, hold on. So normally there's a break for right of reply, but there's only one question, Mayor Tim. What's the time?
Sorry, Brendan, you were also going to look at the total review issue.
Sorry, say that again.
You were also wanting to have a look at the total review issue at the southern boundary of the Moutere Waimea ward.
I'm sorry, I've lost you. What was I doing? Help me.
Page 15 of your briefing.
Yep. So bear with. Just bear with. There's that many pieces of paper here.
Perhaps while you find that, Brendan, maybe I'll pose the other question to the assembled council staff and councillors, elected members, which was the suggestion that all of the workshops were held behind closed doors, and so people didn't actually have a chance to participate. Have you got any thoughts or feedback you want to tell us to pass on about that? I mean, you've got a sense of our direction of travel, but it's interesting.
Yeah, so yes, I'm happy to talk about that. So myself and the former Ombudsman have a bit of a difference of opinion around workshops and attendees and attendances and the role of a representative democracy and how decisions are arrived at or made and information is shared and discussed, which we have corresponded about. And the Ombudsman has a particular perspective. I don't share it, and the Ombudsman did make some recommendations, but they are just that. They're the Ombudsman's view and recommendations. So unfortunately, I haven't had the pleasure of concluding those because the Ombudsman is now, I think, vacating his position. And so I'll have to wait to see what the new one says. So yes, the workshops we held for information of councillors and discussion around some of the technical details were, as our workshops tend to be. And I know Matthias has a view about other workshops as well. But all the decisions made, the information provided, everything that needs to be done to meet our legal responsibilities around decision making was done in accordance with our responsibilities to ensure that all the information was available, was publicly debated and discussed. People could attend, and I think Matthias may have spoken in the public forum in relation to the decision. So yes, but in the case of workshops, we do not follow the Ombudsman's view of how we should operate.
That's a perfect answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, Linda, can you please help me with the clarity that you are seeking?
So Commissioners, on page 15 of your papers, you have looked at a area on the southern boundary of the Muturi Waimea ward, where the boundary appears to separate the town of Wakefield from a very nearby rural residential development.
That's right.
View.
Yeah. Right. And so question back to you, Mayor Tim, is clarify why.
Very conveniently, we have actually the person or the councillor who proposed this amendment, and she will fill you in as to why she proposed it, what the conversation was, and how the community reacted. So I'll hand over to Christine.
Putting Christine on full screen so we can get a good look at
her. Yep, I don't know. No one's doing that. Not on full screen.
No, anyway, you're right. Go for it.
So it is a bit odd, to be fair, because there is kind of like a whole residential development, which is actually in the Lakes Murchison ward. And for all intents and purposes, those people can stand up in that residential development, look down, and all they look down on is actually the village of Wakefield. And their kids all go to that school, etc., etc. And I actually thought that it would make a lot more sense to actually include them into the Muturi Waimea ward. Tried to get some support around my council table, couldn't really get it. And actually, I tried to drum up support for the people that live in that area. Hey, don't you want to be in the Muturi Waimea ward? Seems a bit crazy you're in the Lakes Murchison ward. But in actual fact, the people that lived there, they didn't care. And I'll tell you why I think they didn't care, because they go to the local meeting in Wakefield, the community association meeting, and the deputy mayor, who was the Lakes Murchison councillor, he goes to those meetings. So it's not, the meeting is not even held in his ward, but he goes there with those people and he can represent it. So actually the boundary is kind of meaningless in terms of how those people feel about how they're represented, because they go to a meeting in their local area and their ward councillor is there at the meeting. And so they probably feel they get all the representation they need. So yeah, I couldn't even drum up their own support to change it.
What about if the ward councillor didn't go to the meeting?
Well, they'd be a bit silly if they didn't, to be honest, because it's quite a number of votes, and if you didn't, then the Mutri Waimea ward councillors are going to be there. You share your information.
So then you quite quickly get the Lakes Murchison ward out of the numbers, don't you?
Yeah, and then in actual fact, if you put Trope Review at that subdivision into Mutri Waimea, you make the numbers for Mutri Waimea worse, and you make the overrepresentation in Lakes Murchison worse. So you don't actually fix a problem.
And you'd be shifting a line, and then the next debate would be, well, how you may as well shift the line to the bottom of the hill.
Yeah.
Because those people are all, I mean, at the end of the day, this is the challenge with this whole thing. And I guess it does boil down to a bit of a numbers versus other considerations conversation, which I think you've already touched on, Brendan. Because if you look at Murchison, Lakes Murchison ward, well, clearly it meets the numbers, but you've got one councillor spanning an absolutely enormous area. And so you could quite easily argue that those people, despite meeting the numbers, are the least represented or least accessible or less. And it's really down to the willingness and the ability of that individual person who gets elected, which, as we know, election to election changes, although in Councillor Bryant's case, it hasn't changed for 30 years. But it is going to change at the next election.
And I think
numbers are not the only, as I know you've considered in other determinations about whether representation is equal or similar or comparable across wards and numbers and land areas and different communities and geography. So,
and I think the other thing too is that people who are living there, if they've got something that they want to talk to a councillor about, actually, some of the people will contact me, even though I'm actually not their ward councillor, because actually representation is about who you establish relationships with and how you work and how available you are, rather than the fact that you're just that designated ward councillor.
In fact, post-election, actually wards don't mean anything in terms of the oath you swear. Is not about the ward you were elected from. It is about to serve the district as a whole. So again, I'm sure you're all aware, there are a lot of moving parts. The only other thing I would like to touch on is the conversation or the assumption that was made, I think by both appellants, that people access the services, be they council services, schooling services, or whatever, in the place closest to them. I can absolutely assure you, having lived in this region for my entire life and knowing an enormous number of people across the whole region, that for a whole variety of reasons, there are plenty of people in Motueka who send their kids to school in Nelson City, to Nelson Boys or Nelson Girls College, or to Garran College in Richmond because of the particular schooling that they want to try and send their kids to. Equally, lots of people work in Motueka, in Richmond, live in Motueka, work in Richmond, live in Richmond, work in Nelson, and they will then access the services because it's convenient for them on their way to and from work, not necessarily in Motueka. Even if they live in Tasman, if they work in Richmond, they will go and shop in Richmond. They won't go back and then drive into Motueka. So it's very difficult to generalise. Because I think there are so many different drivers as to where people choose to access, whether it's their school, whether it's their sports club, whether it's their shopping. And this region is probably as good an example of those complexities as anywhere else.
I think we've broadened. Oh, sorry, you go, Commissioner Bighill.
Yes, thank you, team. We've not touched on the fact that you're a unitary authority, really. Are there any particular issues that change things up with the ward boundaries pertaining to your role as a unitary authority and the wide and broad scope of responsibilities you have?
I think it probably, where it does impact is, and it's something that I think Matthias Schaffner raised about the rural-urban thing. I think as a unitary authority, so many more of the decisions you make impact disproportionately on the wider geographical area in terms of whether it's water management, significant natural areas, all those sort of decisions that we're responsible for as a unitary, which would in other regions be undertaken by the
district,
the regional council, does tend to fall more in terms of the impacts of those decisions on those wider rural communities. So hence we've always been, for want of a better term, slightly defensive about how we preserve that rural representation, even if it doesn't necessarily meet the numbers. Because I think that is a good point. Unitary authorities do, in my experience, disproportionately impact on the broader geographical area more than the decisions affect people, the numbers of people specifically.
And there are no fish hooks in this representation for you regarding that?
No, not that haven't observed.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're done in terms of questions. Just it's one other observation, and I think it's fair to say it, that the legislation that we're bound by, that we're working to, is a piece of legislation for the whole country. The dynamics that we deal with in different communities allow for quite extraordinary variables, and it's not unreasonable to observe that the dynamics in the Tasman district frankly do create some additional variables, and that's about geography, it's about people, and as identified by Commissioner Bigham, you are a unitary as well, which is different to the vast majority. So we need to respect that. Look, we're done as far as I can see in terms of questions, in terms of right of reply. Tim, I will give you the last word, though. Is there anything at all that you wish to highlight from the discussions that we've had? You feel free, and then we'll close out.
Thank you for the opportunity to obviously present our perspective. I understand that it's not simple or easy when you're dealing with a bit of legislation that has some numbers in it, and some, as was pointed out by one of the appellants, and sets you down a path. But I think you've noted the fact the Commission has a broad range of ability to take into account a range of factors, and that's really all we're asking, as you consider our position as against your legislative responsibility, and we look forward to seeing what your ultimate determination is.
Brilliant, thank you. So to you and your team, thanks for the hospitality. Pleasing that the technology survived through today, and I'll just close out, if you don't mind, with I welcome you to join us as we close out with our Commission karakia. They will then close off, and then commissioners will reconvene on a separate channel. So I'll just close out with our karakia. Unahia, unahia, unahia e te uru tapanui, ki wātea ki mama, te nāko, te nana te wairua, e te aru takatu. Ko rai ronga whakaria, aki ki ronga, ki wātea, oi rā ki